According to the United Nations, more than 500,000 civilians have now fled Ukraine. And the European Union estimates that around 4 million people may try to leave the country because of the Russian invasion, further propelling a fresh humanitarian crisis. More details coming up in this next report. Take a look.
As Russia continues to pound Ukraine, over 500,000 Ukrainians have fled their embattled country, many crossing into Poland, Slovakia, Hungary and Romania. And footage of the humanitarian crisis led one German to act.
We have watched what's happening. We have seen the pictures on TV, my daughter and me. And we said, this is so horrible, we want to make a small contribution, however small it may be.
Karsten, who did not give his last name, and his daughter drove more than 600 miles from their home in Frankfurt to the city of Przemysl in southeastern Poland, with the goal of finding a few people who need a ride and a place to stay.
We have donated food and supplies, and we'd like to take somebody to the region of Frankfurt. We are also able to provide accommodation for up to 6 people on short notice.
With men of fighting age prevented from leaving Ukraine, most of those arriving at border towns are women and children. Wait times to cross borders ranged from a few hours at small crossings to several days at busier ones, where lines on the Ukraine side stretched back dozens of miles. EU officials have said the war could displace 7 million people. Among them, Bulia Mohammed, a Ukrainian mother fleeing with her children.
It's our country where we lived. It's a pity to leave your homeland. Home is always home. You always want to be at home. I have never thought that our children would be somewhere else.
She found Karsten, who will take her to Germany.
Well, that was quick. We've been here maybe half an hour, and now the car is full.
Car seats and suitcases loaded, they're ready for another long drive. Thousands more are left at the border, hoping too for the generosity of strangers.
For more analysis, joining us now from Canberra is Dr. Malcolm R. Davis, a senior analyst in defence strategy and capability from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Thank you so much, Dr. Davis, for joining us on Beyond at this hour.
Thank you.
Now, my first question to you, new satellite images show a Russian military convoy that has reached the outskirts of Kiev, and it is more than 40 miles long. What's your assessment of this?
Look, I think what you're seeing now are the second and third echelon Russian forces coming into play. So what we've seen up until this point has been the first echelon forces, which have been relatively light in nature and fairly disorganized in terms of their application. And I think the Russians have taken a bloody nose as a result of the way they've conducted the war so far. So they're changing back to a more traditional approach of warfighting, where they apply overwhelming force and sheer advantage in numbers. And I think that's what you're seeing with this column.
Right, absolutely. Now, the Ukrainian President Zelensky has accused Russia of war crimes for bombing the city of Kharkiv. There are also reports of at least 11 civilians killed. Yet Russia seems unfazed and is continuing its war on Ukraine. What will deter Russia at this point?
I don't think anything will deter Putin. Because remember, it's Putin that is calling the shots here. There's already been reports this morning of thermobaric weapons being used against Ukraine, and we all saw the multiple rocket launch attack against Kharkiv last night. So we are in a more dangerous and destructive phase of the war where the Russians, as I said, are using overwhelming firepower to essentially blast their way to victory, to secure Kyiv and to remove the Ukrainian government. Now, whether that works is another question, but certainly the risk is greater civilian casualties going forward.
Right. Just talking about the topic of sanctions now, the European Union has sanctioned top Kremlin-linked oligarchs at this point. Will all these sanctions work to isolate Russia? What's at stake for Vladimir Putin?
Look, I think they are going to work over time. Certainly the economic pain is building up. If you're looking at the indicators of the slide of the ruble and the value of the ruble, it's becoming more and more difficult for the Russian economy to function. If we move further along the continuum in terms of removing more Russian banks from SWIFT, that will help as well. And certainly that economic weapon that we're employing against the Russians is the one weapon we can really use alongside diplomatic sanctions without risking a much wider war. So those sort of sanctions will continue and will be escalated, I'm sure.
Right. Now, Dr. Davis, Ukraine's President Zelensky has called for a no-fly zone to stop Russian bombardment. But the White House says that the U.S. is not considering such a move as of now. Why the resistance from the West to intervene militarily?
Well, if we employ a no-fly zone, then we have to shoot down Russian aircraft. And, everyone understands what that means. It means that the Russians will retaliate, and they certainly will challenge a no-fly zone. So we have to shoot down their aircraft. Right. And where that leads is rapid escalation all the way up to global thermonuclear war. That's why we're resisting that idea.
Right. Just wrapping up our discussion here, my final question for you, a little bit of perspective from you. Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S. recently accused Russia of using something known as a vacuum bomb. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about this?
That's the thermobaric weapon I mentioned earlier. So in other words, what it does is it generates a vacuum that sucks all the air in and ignites that air and then blasts it out. It's sort of like having a nuclear weapon without having a nuclear weapon. It doesn't generate radiation or fallout or anything like that. It just generates a massive explosion with lots of heat and blast. And that's what you've seen happen already.
Right, absolutely, Dr. Davis. Thank you so much for all those insights, and thank you for joining us on WION at this hour. WION World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.